Our third 6-inch tile is the sponge stencil tile, and this project as well is designed to teach us two different things. One, how to utilize cut paper stencils, and two, how to apply underglaze using a sponge for a very specific look. Okay. We're going to start by tearing off a piece of sponge. You want to use as natural a sponge with visible holes as you can, and when you use the sponge, you want to use the rough side. Okay. Now we're going to apply one small coat over the whole tile just to give it a background color. And we're going to start with our lightest colors first. If we start with our dark colors, the light colors we add on top of them tend to get swallowed. And sometimes it's helpful to blot off some of the excess. What you're going to do is just very lightly blot the tile. Like I said, this color, I happen to be using the Harvest Gold, and it's actually fairly watered down. So this will be a very light coating over the whole tile, just to give it a nice even background color. And you can see already the unique characteristics of the different thicknesses of underglaze that we have on here. Where they're thick and thin spots, you get a variegated texture that's very unique to applying with a sponge. Now we're going to set that aside to dry for just a second while we decide what we're going to use as the image for our stencil. Now since I've got a yellow background here, I think I'm going to do just a very simple sort of mountainy horizon line here. And we'll turn this into somewhat of a sunset for the first stencil. You see I've drawn my design here. I'm going to carefully cut this out. Now don't feel like you're limited to using one stencil or using your stencil only once. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and figure out where I want that stencil line to go, and you can rinse your sponge out in between colors. Make sure the sponge itself isn't too wet, however. You want it just slightly damp, not overly wet, otherwise your underglaze is liable to run. And I'm going to go in with a little bit of this rose. Once again, blotting it on the paper or lid. Go right up to the edge of the stencil. And what this stencil will do, it'll hold back that rose underglaze from where you don't want it to be. So what you get is a very firm line with that sponge application up and around it. Now I want to add a little something more down here. So I'm going to take another stencil, and this time I think I'm going to add a tree. Sort of a palm tree kind of thing. And once again, I'm going to take this and cut it out. But this time, instead of using the piece that I cut out, I'm going to use the outside edge. So I want to make sure that that all stays in one piece. Rotating the paper as you cut is often helpful. Let you get in those sharp corners and lines. If you have very sharp corners, if it's easier for you, sometimes making the cuts with an X-Acto knife can be more precise than trying to cut in and out with scissors. Sort of a very abstract little tree form here. So we're going to set this piece aside. I might use that one later, but right now what I'm looking for is this outside stencil. I want to put him right about there. Now on your sponge stencil tile, I want you to use a minimum of 3 colors. You can use more colors. You can use as many colors as you want. The more layers you have, the more visual information you have. Remember to blot off the excess before you apply it with the sponge to get the most out of that variegated texture. And you'll see we've got our little tree form there. And you can use whatever subject matter appeals to you. I'm going to bring this partial stencil back in here again. Give me another layer of information. And you can do some freeform stenciling at all. You're not limited to just applying around the sponge, around the stencil. Whatever appeals to you. When you have the underglaze layers that you want, when you have the stencil layers that you want, you can always come in and add details with brushes. If that appeals to you, to bring in more color, if that seems like that's something that would add to your piece. Once you have all that finished, go ahead and set it aside for the bisque fire. When it has been bisqued, you can go ahead with the glaze coat, and that project is finished.